Hi,
Hey, Paul. Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
You know, oh wow, I can't speak. It seems I am attempting to build a Linux router like you do yearly for whatever reason, and I
Right.
can't seem to the life of me get the damn thing to actually forward traffic out to the internet. And it's driving me crazy. How are you?
I'm doing great. Did you remember to set up your NATs?
Yeah, I've done all that stuff.
Have you
I can't
done your
even get
IP
to.
tables post mask?
Yes, it's doing masquerade and everything.
Wow. All right.
I'm forgetting something obvious, and it's driving me crazy. But
I'm
you know,
surprised you're not using some weird BSD derivative router slash firewall.
yeah, it did cross my mind. But so I'm getting a bunch of construction done at my house, and I've
Mm-hmm.
got to like basically take down my home lab. But I have this one Raspberry Pi that's running PiWare, which is like the little you know flights around your house or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, well, I'll just throw zero tier on here and then turn it on zero tier and then use IP tables. So if I ever need to like get on my phone and hop on zero tier so I can go through my house to get to like you know VPN control or whatever.
What's the
And
RTO?
it's like WireGuard but better.
Okay.
Um, so like OpenVPN, right?
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Um, yeah. Um, and for whatever reason, like I'm so close, but I can't seem to get it. Can't land it. I can get to
Mm-hmm.
my actual PiAware, like the SkyAware, like see all the flights around my house, like
Mm-hmm.
from my phone through 5G, but I can't get past the machine. So
Wait, if you look at FlightAware over 5G, doesn't that make all the planes crash?
only on Tuesdays.
Only on
Only on
Tuesdays. All
Tuesdays.
right. Well, thank God it's not Tuesday.
Yep, exactly. What day is it today?
It's Thursday, JJ.
Yes. What do we do on Thursdays, Paul?
Well, we wake up, we have some breakfast, we take a shower, we drink some coffee, we get started over that day. Is this the level of detail you're looking for?
Actually, I was expecting you to tell me exactly what the steps you take. Like, I want to hear how many steps it is from your bed to your sink when you
Listen,
brush your teeth.
JJ,
And
I put on my pants like anyone else. I called Jeeves and have him come
yeah,
over and put them on for me.
yeah, Hudson is doing not exactly what I need him to do nowadays. Unfortunately, he's he's just he's
You know,
poisonous.
sometimes it's time to let your old valet go, and you need to get a new valet, one that's
It's
more
true.
capable and more willing to perform the functions in which they're supposed to. Have you ever seen the show Jeeves and Wooster?
No, but I do know of it. I
Right.
do
So
know.
it's. I feel like, are we even going to stream today, or are we just going to talk about weird stuff? So it's
I mean, why
Stephen
not?
Fry and Hugh Laurie. So Stephen
Oh
Fry
yes.
is like a old money British gentleman that's like slowly, well, pretty much mostly like squandered all of his family money, and then Stephen Fry is his valet, which is like a fancy way of saying a very personal butler.
Hmm.
And so it's quite an amusing show. They're both very funny people,
Absolutely.
and it's from probably 30 years ago, maybe longer, because they're old and we're old.
It's true.
But definitely,
It's true.
it's still funny despite its age. Like many good British comedies, it aged very well.
Very well.
And they also have
Yeah.
another show, a little bit of Fry and Laurie, which is kind of like a just like a skit slash variety show, which is also quite
Oh,
good.
nice.
Yeah,
Yes, I didn't know about that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I
If you want to see Doctor House getting up to all sorts of crazy antics from before he was Doctor House, I highly recommend it.
yeah. Well, how I got introduced to Stephen Fry, believe it or not, was actually the Harry Potter books. He the unabridged British version is Stephen Fry reading every single word of the series,
Right.
and
Hmm. I'm
that
not
was
into Harry Potter, but the idea of listening to his dulcet tones for hours on end actually is quite appealing.
and he does voices too, which is even greater, which
Oh,
is even
good.
better. So, yeah.
Hey,
But anyway, Paul,
speaking of
yeah,
voices, Your buddy, what's his name that does the oh boy, the what's the books about Joe Bush Bishop with the AI? Um, what's that series?
Are you drunk?
In
I have no
space,
idea what you're talking about.
the Expeditionary Force.
No idea what you're. Yes. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Expeditionary
Dude,
Force. Yeah,
he's
yeah, yeah.
prolific. I looked the other day, and there was like 4 new books. It's up
What?
to like book
Really?
15 or something ridiculous.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So if
Yeah.
I know that it's been a while since we traveled because that was he was one of my go-to
Mm-hmm.
authors to listen to when we were traveling. And I'm sure I've listened to some since. And so I was kind of surprised. I randomly look it up and see an extra bunch of books to listen through.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they're
Yeah,
not
those Skippy
amazing
man.
books. They're not amazing books, but they're good enough that if you just want something to listen to, you know, pass some time while you're driving or walking or performing other activities that don't require thinking. Although you should think while you drive. I should take that back.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. But if
Yeah.
you're staring at a bulkhead of an airplane, it's
Yeah.
probably a good idea.
Yeah. And as always, you should be listening to your audiobooks at least 1.5x.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's funny, anytime I listen to a podcast or audiobook that's at like 1x, it feels like they're talking so slowly. And like I get it because like they're really good at enunciation and they're being very clear and everything. But oh my God, dude, just say it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, 1.5x minimum speed.
Minimum.
But it's funny because I can go faster, but then I actually feel like if I go faster, I won't get my money's worth because I paid
I
for
just don't.
20 hours 20 hours of someone reading a book to me, and I've already shortened it to what, 15. If I get into
Mhm.
10, well, I'm wasting my money at that point.
Yep. 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 Oh
So we
yeah.
mustn't have a
Yeah.
lot to
And
stream about because we're waffling on about a bunch of garbage.
no, you just keep talking, and I'm just letting you
Oh,
talk
all right,
without
fair enough.
interrupting you. But anyway, so what do we do on Thursdays normally, Paul?
We normally stream, and we stream about things that are in the Kubernetes and/or general cloud native space, and sometimes not even the cloud native space, just interesting tech things that
Mm-hmm.
we get into. I myself, I work at Red Hat. I'm a managed OpenShift black belt, and JJ is a developer advocate for the IBM Cloud. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And
And
so we usually do something that's relevant to either of our jobs, but not always. But
okay.
these last few streams, we've been doing a bunch of Ansible work and focusing on using Ansible to spin up Azure Red Hat OpenShift clusters, which is OpenShift, but run by and managed by a combination of Azure and Red Hat. So it's very much like AKS or EKS or insert XKS here, except it's the full OpenShift suite.
Yep.
And you can buy that from Azure directly by the hour and play around with OpenShift and turn it off and not look back. So it's a good way
Mm-hmm.
for people to kick the tires or maybe learn some new skills with a product or a large software distribution or whatever we're supposed to call it that
Mm-hmm.
is normally pretty hard to get your hands on unless you actually work somewhere with OpenShift licenses, OpenShift subscriptions. Sorry, they're not licenses. Oh boy, if someone hears that, I'll be going back
Mm-hmm.
to redo my sales training.
Yep.
Uh,
You'll be a yellow belt again. You lose your black
right,
belt.
right. Whereas ARO, and then we have the same thing in AWS called ROSA, and we actually also have it on IBM Cloud as well. They're all by the hour. So if you wanted to spend 8 to 10 hours, cramming on how OpenShift works and how it's different to Kubernetes, it's a pretty cost-effective way to do it. If you're a professional in the industry, you probably have a couple $100 you can throw into personal development. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
bad way to do it. And then you can put OpenShift on your resume and get paid $4 million a year or whatever the going rate is for OpenShift SREs.
I thought it was 5.
Well,
That's fine.
it's inflation and all that. I can't keep
Ah,
up.
yes, I guess it's true. That is true. All right, well, so let's hop in. We did some pretty neat stuff. So if you haven't seen it, if you ping me in the chat, and I can throw you links to the previous streams we've done. But we've made really nice headway. So how about you show us, Paul, where you are now?
Right. So, kind of setting the stage, we have mob.ninja, which is our team's website containing kind of all the interesting work we do that is relevant to the products that we help with. And we have a quick start for deploying ARO in its standard form. And it's basically, you can see here, it's all using the CLI because no one wants to watch someone click in a GUI. And it's reasonably straightforward, just a lot of copying and pasting. And that gets you an OpenShift cluster in Azure. And then we have a secondary doc. And I don't think I showed this yet, but this is basically creating a private cluster, so one that does not have public endpoints. And so obviously one of the things you need to do then is have some way to access it. If you're in a large organization, you probably have some sort of backhaul VPC connection into the Azure network. But if you're not, you can effectively do the same thing with a jump host and then use a tool called Shuttle, which is SSH Shuttle, which is basically like a VPN over SSH. So as long as you have a SSH box inside of your network, you run this shuttle command, and it effectively gives you a VPN to the network on the other end, which is pretty useful. You can also forward a SOCKS proxy port through SSH if you want to just connect, say, your browser up to access something inside of a VPC that you don't normally have access to. So this basically talks through those additional steps to do that. And so the reason I want to show this is I've actually made a significant amount of headway into this Ansible repo because I actually had some customer-facing reasons to spend some time on it. And my computer decided it should try and restart right now, even though I told it to wait 4 hours. Thank you very much, Windows Updates. So let me think.
Just go ahead and reboot it real quick. I'll drop you off.
Nah, it's fine. Here. It's fine. No, sure? I told it not to. I snoozed it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay.
And if I end up disappearing, you know why.
Yep.
So that's kind of where we got to. So if you're doing a private cluster, there's a bunch of extra stuff to do firewalling because, pardon me, if it's going to be private, it should be private. And so rather than saying you can access the entire internet, I can actually lock it down and give it a bunch of target domain names, which are the things that OpenShift will still need to reach out to access, but will block regular egress out to the internet. Bunch of stuff like that. So there's a few things we were doing last stream. So initially we
idempotency. Idempotency.
Bless you.
Yes.
So initially, the main thing we were trying to do was get the cluster up, and most of the stuff we were able to do with the Azure collection in Ansible. So what do I mean by that? I mean this stuff here. So basically, a bunch of Ansible modules for performing work. For example, if you want to create Active Directory application service principals users, you can do that. If you want to create an AKS cluster, you can do that. And somewhere down there is the OpenShift one, which we didn't see at first. And so we actually did the OpenShift spin up with the ARO CLI and wrapped that. But then we found the OpenShift, let me just find it right here, OpenShift Managed Cluster module. But a few things we found, let's pop down to examples, is rather than just in the ARO CLI, you can just provide a subnet name, whereas you see here, it's asking for the subnet ID. And the other thing is if you're using the API or the Azure Ansible modules, you have to create a service principal for your cluster to use beforehand. Whereas if you use the Azure CLI, it actually does that for you in the background. And what I discovered was it's not obvious how to do this. I did find one of my friends at Microsoft, Stuart Kirk, actually has an Ansible ARO repository. And as you can see, he's actually running this AD command to create a service principal, and then filling in some variables, then running some more commands, filling in some variables. And so there's kind of this extra pre-work he was doing here. And I sort of asked why, and it just turned out that this is actually doing a bunch of stuff under the hood that you can't do easily with the API. You've got to do like a bunch of disparate commands and sort of tie them together. So you actually have, if I remember correctly, you need an Active Directory application and an Active Directory user or service principal that ties to that. And then you can create an Active Directory password or secret that then ties to that. Whereas this command here does it all for you. Say let's go ahead and run this. Go ahead and run this. And it's actually going to give us a bunch of stuff, right? And so we'll need to delete this because I just gave people a password and stuff that they could use in your Azure account. But you can see it creates an app ID, gives you a display name, a password. And so you can use that app ID and the password and you're good to go, basically. But you can't do that with the APIs directly, which means you can't do it directly with Ansible. So I had to figure a bunch of stuff out. And so let's have a look at that because there's a fair bit of stuff going on. So up in roles, it's under a cluster create tasks and then RBAC. And so the first thing we need to do is find out what our subscription and tenant IDs are. And so first of all, if you provide it, it'll just use what you provided. If not, it'll run this to figure it out. And you can see it's setting the facts here.
What's that block command on line 2?
So block commands let you run a set of tasks as a group, and you can put a conditional around that. So basically, these two have to be met in order for the block to be run. So basically, if these are empty and we don't have a cluster yet, it will run this whole thing.
Nice.
So next, I want a sensible display name. So I set a fact, which is basically Ansible ARO, and then the Azure resource group and the cluster name, right? And that way, and here's the thing, this doesn't have to be unique, but when we create it, and then we create the, so we create, let's have a look. We create an application, right? And that outputs, among other things, an application ID and an object ID. So we want to capture those for later use. And then we create a service principal, and that has to be connected to the application ID, right? And so this is effectively the user that the system will use. And then, of course, because it's actually Active Directory in the background, you need to give it a little bit of time to actually replicate and work. Unfortunately, it took me hours to realize that the reason I was failing was because the user wasn't created yet. So I put that pause in. Then you create a password, which interestingly is attached to the application ID, not the service principal itself. And then we can go ahead and basically scope out what it has permissions to. So you can see here, I'm setting getting a bunch of role definitions to figure out what the object ID is of the role that is contributor that is attached to just my subscription. And so I do that there. And I'm doing it for, I've got another one for the resource group. And then I've got another one even further down just for the networks themselves. And that way we can start to give things fine-grained access. And then here, I did that minute pause, but here where I do the role assignment, I want to make sure that 1 minute was enough. If it wasn't, it'll just keep retrying until the replication is done and it shows up. So that all happens in order to just get the permissions I need to be able to get a cluster created, and will effectively provide the username and password that I need to provide to the OpenShift thing. But what I was talking about here, I set this display name, and the display name isn't unique. But here's the thing that is unique, which is the object ID or the app ID of the Active Directory app. If you don't capture that, you don't know what it is when it's time to delete the cluster, right?
Yes.
So what I made the decision of is, okay, while app display name doesn't need to be unique, I'm going to decide that it is going to be unique, and therefore I'm going to expect there to only be one. And so therefore I can check to see if it exists. And so what I do is I actually have to get all Active Directory applications, and then I have to run it through a JMES query. And that JMS query is basically looking at because it comes out as a list inside of a JSON blob. And so basically I'm looking for any time that there is an application that has the app display name of what I said above. And if that already exists, I'm actually going to fail and say that an Active Directory application with that display name already exists. So basically, I'm gating myself creating a second one if one already exists. And what that means when it comes to deletion time, I can say basically the same thing in reverse.
Look for it and then delete it. Yeah, okay.
Which is so first of all, I delete the cluster, and then I basically do the same thing. I get the app display name, and then I again get my service principals, all of the service principals in my tenant, and then I look to see if their app display name matches the app display name I set, and it's going to delete every single one that matches it. So even if somehow you did end up with more than one, this is going to go and clean them all up anyway.
Nice.
So this is kind of a convention I've decided upon, and anyone else that wanted to use this would need to make sure they followed that same convention. Otherwise, they could be potentially destroying other apps. But I figure the chances of someone accidentally having an app name that is Ansible ARO, the resource group, and the cluster name that's not supposed to be unique is pretty low. So it's a pretty safe assumption to make. And so that's done. Then under, we also now have a Bootstrap, which will create a Bootstrap node. And so basically this will, oh, sorry, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the jump host. That Bootstrap is old. So the jump host will create a jump host subnet, and then it will create a virtual machine, just a rel machine, and it's going to pass in a script to use for user data to install a bunch of apps, which looks like user data. So it's basically going to deploy the Azure CLI, OpenShift CLI, kubectl CLI, etc. So it'll give us a reasonably functional jump host to get going with. And then we also can do this egress lockdown, which if you do a private cluster, you can, if you do the egress lockdown, it'll basically put a firewall between you and the internet. And so that's basically what this is doing, creating a firewall subnet, creating a firewall, doing a bunch of stuff. Now, what's interesting is this is actually post cluster deployment. So you need to deploy the cluster and then apply the firewall.
Mm-hmm.
So what I actually do is when I'm running the playbook here, we do infra create, cluster create. Then if Azure jump host is set to true, it'll create a jump host. If egress lockdown is set to true, it will run the egress lockdown. And then it's going to wait for the cluster to be up. And then once the cluster is up, it actually reruns infra create, which if we come to infra create, we'll see I have some logic in here where basically, so the virtual network doesn't change, but the subnets create. So the first thing we do is if egress lockdown is enabled, we need to fetch some details about the firewall that got created because we need to use its IP address later on.
Okay.
And then we have two blocks. One is if we're not using the firewall, and then one if we are. So basically, the first time you run it, this is a block that will be run because even if the firewall is there, even if the egress lockdown is set, there's no firewall in existence yet, and therefore it doesn't need to set the firewall as the default route. If the firewall is there and is set up and ready, we run this second block, which will see the route table here. It will set up the route table. It will set it to use the route table, and that route table is created in the firewall block. And so that way, the first time is correct, and then the second time is correct, and it's still idempotent. Because what I did first is I actually had these down in the firewall block, but what that meant was if you were to rerun this playbook, the infra would actually remove the route table, and then the firewall would create it again. So there'd be that window of time where it wasn't quite what I wanted, right? So I had to move the logic to gate and make a decision there. So that's kind of where we got to. And let me show you.
Question. I got a question. Just because we don't know who's watching. When you create that jump box that can talk to your private OpenShift cluster, the idea is to make sure that the OpenShift cluster is not on the actual internet.
Exactly. So basically, if we look at so the other thing I did, and I don't know if I had done this before or after the last stream, is all of the variables, I actually moved defaults. I moved into a role called vars, and then that is a dependency in all of the others. And that way I sort of just have one place to look up all my variables.
I haven't seen that yet. So that's new.
And so if you look at, so here, whether you want these basically are my endpoints, public or private, right?
So the question, the follow-up question about that is, having this as a private OpenShift cluster that you have to get to a jump box, can it get to the actual internet? Can I like run stuff on there, or do I need to go through the jump box to get out? Like what is the advantage of running a private OpenShift?
Well, so there's two things, right? So you need to go through the jump box to access the API or even the applications running on it, right?
Okay.
Or you have a VPN or VPC interconnect into it, right? Which most large enterprises have some kind of direct connection into their VPCs, and so they wouldn't need to use a jump host. But in this scenario, I'm not expecting people to, build out physical infrastructure to connect into Azure so that they can do this. So my workaround is to use a jump host.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we have, I guess there's three things at place. First of all, setting these to false. Actually, let me switch to where I have some environment. So you've got the default, and then I've got the private. So if we look at our private group vars, you can see I'm setting these to false. You can see I'm setting the jump host to true, and I'm setting my egress lockdown to true.
Nice.
Right. And actually, let me just check that you have a...
Yeah, we only ever go into this box. It doesn't have an actual key. Like, we never go out of Tmux anyway.
I don't remember. Right, thank you. Thank you. Wow. Well, I'm failing at typing. Oh, we don't need a password. You do have a private key, but it didn't have a matching public key.
Override is fine.
All right. That way, if we run this, it's gonna work. So finally, in my make file, obviously I have make create, make delete, but I also now have create private and delete private.
Nice.
Which use the alternate inventory that will set it up and make sure it's all private. So we can actually go ahead and do, I hope, make create private.
Yeah, it looks like an Ansible run.
And so that should kick things off. And assuming we still have our Azure credentials and everything, and they're still good, here we can see. So, creating infrastructure first, resource group networks and stuff, and then we'll go ahead and create a cluster, and then it will go through and start setting up the firewall.
What is that?
Oh, no, that's right. Huh. Never mind. That's actually because the firewall was missing. What I need to do is for things like that. So that was in infra, create tasks main. Here, I actually want to do no log true. Because basically that this lookup fails because there is no firewall, right? And so I don't want it to fail. So I do failed when false, but I also don't want it to log a bunch of stuff that looks like an error. So if we set no log true, it's not going to log the output, and so that'll help keep our run clean.
Oh, that was the thing you created on the account. Can you delete that thing while this is going?
Which thing?
Remember you created like a password or something on
your
account?
I've
already forgotten what it is.
AD app list. Right. Probably.
Wait, no, that's on your machine though. Yeah, you don't want to delete those.
Patch. AZAD. Let's see if it's going to have done it in.
I mean, I can dig around, but I really don't remember what it is.
This is the one that just got created by
yes.
by us, not by our command, by actually by Ansible. The AD SP. Really? Thanks for nothing. Right. So let's grab this. at ed app SP list. No. Right.
Oh, there you go. It's angry.
Right.
This is a service principal, right?
Yeah. Right. Here's our app ID here. Say yes.
DFW mirror rackspace.com. Freeman7, great question. Why Azure, not IBM Cloud? The the advantage of OpenShift is OpenShift is OpenShift is OpenShift. So we are focusing on using OpenShift specifically and showing what is required to get an OpenShift cluster working on Azure, which is the advantage here. We understand there are other clouds out there, and but we want everyone to use OpenShift. So we want to show how easy it is. It doesn't matter what cloud you run, just use OpenShift. Right, Paul?
Yeah, exactly. One of the big things we push for is, while IBM would love you to use the IBM Cloud, there are many reasons that companies do not, including they have massive existing footprints elsewhere. And so, as well as asking them nicely to come to us, it's also on us to go to them, right? And so, whether they run OpenShift on IBM Cloud or whether they run OpenShift on Azure, it's a win for us, right? Yeah, okay, it might be a double win if they're running on IBM Cloud, but at the end of the day, we don't want to lose them simply because they choose not to use one of our products or services, right? Yep. Okay. So I think with ID and then that.
Also, to throw in too, the ability for us to understand the different clouds out there too, and understand the different strengths and weaknesses allows us to work and advocate better with our customers, or our downstream users, to be able to say, "Hey, turns out you're focusing really well on this thing. This cloud is really good at this," or "Hey, you're thinking about going down this path to do X, Y, and Z. Have you thought about using this cloud instead?" And again, OpenShift is OpenShift is OpenShift, and it works everywhere, every major cloud. Hopefully that answered your question, Freeman7. Got any more? Don't hesitate to throw it in the chat.
Principal not found. Interesting.
Did you wait long?
No. Okay. This is an assumption I made that was bad, that I didn't know was bad until I just ran this. So this is good to know. So if I go back, I think we can fix this real quick. Under cluster create, I have, so this is one I did using Stuart's instructions. And one of the things he did was run this. Right here. And so I actually need to bring this across into mine. This is basically we need to give ARO permissions to do stuff in my cluster, in my resource. And therefore I need to bring this in to RBAC.
Freeman 7, is the term Gaia X? I've never seen that before, ever. Let me do some Googling while Paul's talking about what he's doing here.
Oh, where's... that is not what I thought he was doing. Interesting. Well, in that case, let me pop to my browser. Interesting. So I need to replicate this guy right here. RPOID. Well, this is going to be fun.
Filter's gross. That is gross.
Yeah, it's not too bad. So I effectively need to rerun the SP list. So I need to get my service principals. Let's come right up to the top. Name. Service principals. Oh, look at this.
Nice. By the way, Paul, would you like to know what Gaia X is?
Sure.
So Gaia X actually is a project reported for working on development of Federation of Data Infrastructure and Service Providers for Europe. Its stated aims to being efficient, competitive, secure, and trustworthy. It is described as supported by representative science, business administration from Germany and France, together with other European partners. It is the reported objective Gaia X is to design the next generation of federated European data infrastructure. So basically, it's another group of people in Europe attempting to build shared data infrastructure, I'm assuming. It seems pretty neat from at least the Wikipedia article. There's a lot of political support around it. I have a feeling it probably spurred from GDPR's, well, quote unquote, success, which is neat. But I know from my standpoint and my vantage, this is the first I've ever seen it. It's the first I've ever heard of it. So I'm gonna obviously look deeper into this, see how I can help out our European friends. But right now, this is brand new to me.
All right. Oh, okay. This needs to be fully qualified like that is. Run this. So the first thing I'm doing is getting our list of service principals to make sure that we see it.
Mm-hmm.
So while we're debugging this,
according to Freeman 7, I understand it is a multi-cloud designed by a committee with compatible APIs and stuff. So OpenStack? Question mark.
Okay. Oh, something wrong here. I should fix that. Saying that's not true. And then we're just making sure it's here. So basically, we're trying to find the service principal for Azure Red Hat. I had assumed it was a global ID across all of Azure, but it looks like it's a per account ID. So basically, I have to try and find it inside of my subscription. Oh, I bet that private key you had there, JJ, was to push to GitHub. So I think I just broke your ability to push to GitHub.
Oh yeah, that would make sense.
Okay.
It's not a big
So
deal.
that's almost working. I think we're just not using the right. So app ID and tenant. I don't want ID. Client ID. Password. Yeah. Okay. This is. So tenant's the only thing that's required. So all of this crap. I don't know where it got all of this crap from. But we can just grab tenant from here.
Freeman7 just asked, why doesn't IBM have their own competitor for Visual Studio? So Visual Studio is traditionally, what is it? C# or Visual Basic. Visual Studio is a Microsoft product. The industry's kind of de facto standard, or just kind of decided that Visual Studio Code is now the de facto standard when it comes to IDEs. I mean, it really is. You can even run Visual Studio Code in a browser as a client server architecture. And hell, if you've never hit the period button on GitHub, I strongly suggest doing that on a repo you have rights to, because it actually spins up Visual Studio Code in your browser that you can make direct edits to the repository you're looking at, which is pretty damn cool.
What? You just do that with the period command?
Just the period. You want to show it to us real quick?
Yeah. Do I have a? Let me see.
And it is Visual Studio Code is open source and all that jazz. So
here,
it's.
I can just hit dot.
Yep.
Whoa!
There you go.
Boom!
And it's a container running on Azure, if I remember correctly. But it's everything you need to do there, and it's a whole infrastructure to
incredible.
If you run GitHub Enterprise internally in your company, they have to turn that on. But on public GitHub, it works just fine.
Okay. That did not give us what we wanted. Why? Let's come back to RBAC. Check for list service principals in my tenant. What? What the actual F? Azure RM Activate Service Principal info. Looking at my tenant. And we're getting nothing? Okay. Let's undo no log. And then let's do run this. Our verbosity. Yes. Yeah. How is there no service principles? I'm confused. Let's come back to what Stuart had here. Let's make sure we get output here. We do.
We do.
So here is doing a AD service principal list,
Mm-hmm.
and it's looking for a display name that matches that. At display name equals object ID. So that's getting the object ID of it, which then that is different to mine, to what I was seeing. But why are we not getting that output from here? So if we look back at our doc, hold on. Service principal info. Tenant is required. What if we do, oh. If we get rid of the, I hate this. For some reason, we've lost our prompt formatting. That's super annoying. And let's get rid of this filter. Put that back in.
Paul, I'm sorry, buddy. It's less than 6 minutes away from the top of the hour.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and unfortunately, normally with Paul and I stream, we keep going because we try to finish off whatever we're working on. But today, I have to disappear. Freeman7, thank you so much for putting some thoughts and questions into the chat. It's always great to hear people seeing or interacting with us. We try to be as helpful as we can, and hopefully we answer some of your questions. So yeah, cool. Well, Paul, you want to say anything while you're hacking away at this?
No, I'm too sad to talk. Anyways, that's fine. I just need to fix why it's not finding the service principal. But this is good to know because I had thought it was a static ID and it's not. So that's definitely something I need to fix.
Cool.
Well,
we'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Right. I will see you then, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.
All right. Bye, everybody. Bye.